Josh, Kevin, and Emma were best friends, bound by curiosity and a love for thrills. Their small town didn't offer much excitement, so they often explored abandoned places to entertain themselves. When Emma heard about an old house on the outskirts of town, she couldn't resist sharing the idea. "They say people feel something cold touching them there," Emma said, her eyes gleaming. Josh leaned back in his chair. "Sounds like a made-up story. Probably just an old drafty house." Kevin smirked. "What if it's not? Let's go and find out." Emma grinned. "I knew you'd say that." Josh hesitated but eventually agreed. "Fine, but if anything weird happens, we're out of there." The house stood deep in the woods, hidden behind gnarled trees and thick bushes. The roof sagged and the windows were broken, dark like empty eyes. The air was colder near the house and the quiet felt unnatural. "This place looks like it's been abandoned forever," Kevin said, stepping onto the porch. The wood creaked loudly under his boots. Emma pushed the door open. It groaned on its hinges, revealing a dark, musty interior. Dust floated in the air, and the smell of decay was strong. "Let's look around," she said, holding up her flashlight. The group stepped inside, their footsteps echoing. The walls were covered in faded wallpaper, peeling in long strips. Furniture lay overturned, and the silence was oppressive. "This place is just old," Josh said, though his voice was shaky. As they moved from room to room, the temperature seemed to drop. In one corner of the living room, an old piano stood, its keys yellowed with age. Emma ran her fingers over them, but no sound came out. "Even the piano's dead," she joked, but no one laughed. Kevin pointed his flashlight at the staircase. "Let's check upstairs." The steps groaned as they climbed. At the top, the hallway stretched into darkness, lined with closed doors. One door at the end stood slightly ajar. A faint light flickered inside, as if from a candle. "Who lit that?" Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. Kevin shrugged. "Only one way to find out." Josh hesitated. "This feels wrong." But Kevin was already walking toward the door, Emma close behind him. Josh reluctantly followed. The room was empty, except for a large antique mirror leaning against the wall. Its surface was cracked, and it reflected the faint light coming from nowhere. The air in the room was icy, and all three of them shivered. "What's with this mirror?" Kevin asked, stepping closer. Emma frowned. "It's broken, but it's still reflecting weirdly." Josh stayed near the door, his unease growing. "Let's go. This place isn't normal." Before anyone could respond, the door slammed shut behind him. The light flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. "Who closed the door?" Josh shouted, pulling at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Emma screamed. "Something touched me!" The flashlight in Kevin's hand flickered back to life. He turned it toward Emma. Her face was pale and she held her arm. Dark, finger-shaped bruises appeared where she said she was touched. "Who's here?" Kevin yelled, swinging the flashlight around. The mirror began to glow faintly. In its cracked surface, shadows started to move. Hands pressed against the inside of the glass, their long fingers sliding slowly downward. "Is this a joke?" Josh shouted, still yanking at the door. "No one's laughing," Kevin snapped, backing away from the mirror. The shadows in the mirror multiplied. More hands appeared, pushing against the glass. And then, one by one, the hands began to stretch out of the mirror, their fingers impossibly long and cold. "Help me!" Emma screamed as one of the hands grabbed her wrist, pulling her toward the mirror. Josh and Kevin rushed to her, grabbing her arms and pulling her back. The hands were ice cold, leaving frost on her skin. "Let her go," Kevin shouted, kicking at the hands, but more of them emerged. The whispers began. "Stay with us." The shadows poured out of the mirror, forming vague shapes that surrounded the three friends. Cold hands grabbed at their clothes, their arms, their faces. Josh's flashlight fell to the ground, its beam casting wild shadows. "We have to get out," he yelled. "Break the mirror!" Emma screamed. Kevin grabbed a broken chair from the corner of the room and swung it at the mirror. The glass shattered with a deafening sound, and the glowing stopped. The shadows froze for a moment before vanishing. The door creaked open on its own. "Run!" Josh shouted, grabbing Emma's hand. The three of them bolted down the stairs and out of the house. They didn't stop running until they were far into the woods. Back at Emma's house, they sat in silence, staring at the bruises on her arms. The dark, finger-shaped marks were cold to the touch. "That wasn't real," Josh muttered, trying to convince himself. "It felt real," Emma said, her voice trembling. Kevin looked down at his own hands. His fingers were numb, frostbite forming on the tips. "I think it followed us," he said quietly. That night, all three of them felt it again. Cold fingers brushing their skin in the dark. Kevin's room grew so cold, his windows frosted over. Emma woke up to faint whispers coming from her mirror. Josh saw handprints appear on his bedroom wall, slowly sliding down. One by one, they disappeared. Emma was the first to go. Her family found her room empty, except for a cracked mirror with smudged handprints. Kevin vanished a week later, leaving behind frozen footprints leading to his bedroom mirror. Josh lasted the longest. He stayed awake for days, refusing to look at any reflective surface. But one night, he couldn't help himself. He glanced into the bathroom mirror and saw them, those cold, pale hands reaching out. The next morning, his house was empty. The old house still stands, waiting. People say if you see handprints on your mirrors, it means the shadows have found you. And once they touch you, they'll never let go. Danny and Mark were best friends. They did everything together, rode their bikes, played soccer, and spent entire afternoons exploring strange places. One chilly autumn evening, Mark whispered to Danny about an old mansion on the edge of town. "People say it's haunted," Mark said, his voice shaking with excitement. "No one goes inside. It's been empty for years." Danny grinned. "Let's go." It was always Danny's idea to take risks, and Mark never refused. That night, under the pale moonlight, the boys sneaked through the foggy streets to the house. The mansion was massive, with broken windows and rotting wood. It looked like it had been abandoned forever. Vines climbed up the walls like veins on old skin. The gate groaned when Mark pushed it open. "This is stupid," Mark muttered, but he followed Danny anyway. They climbed up the crumbling steps and pushed the front door. It creaked open, and a cold breeze wrapped around them, chilling their bones. The inside of the house smelled like wet earth and something else, something rotten. "We shouldn't be here," Mark whispered. Danny turned on his flashlight. "Don't be scared. It's just a house." But it didn't feel like just a house. The silence inside was thick, like a heavy blanket pressing down on their ears. Dust floated through the air. The walls were peeling, and the wooden floor groaned under their weight. The boys wandered from room to room. Each space felt colder than the last. Then they heard it. A sound. Tap, tap, tap. It was soft, like fingertips tapping against a window pane. Mark froze. "Did you hear that?" Danny's eyes darted around. "It's probably just the wind." They kept walking. The tapping followed them. No matter where they went, through the kitchen, past the library, up the cracked staircase, it was there. Tap, tap, tap. In one of the rooms upstairs, Danny stopped. "Look," he said, pointing at a dusty mirror against the wall. Mark stepped closer. Their reflections stared back at them, but something wasn't right. The air grew colder. And then they saw it. Fingers. On the glass. Human fingers, but not theirs. They pressed against the other side of the mirror, leaving smudges that looked like bruises. The fingers slid slowly down, as though someone or something was trying to escape. Mark stumbled back. "We have to leave!" Danny didn't move. His eyes were wide, his breath shallow. Then he whispered, "Someone's behind us." Mark spun around. Nobody was there, but he felt it. A touch. Cold. Gentle, like fingertips brushing against his arm. He screamed. Danny grabbed his hand and they ran. They flew down the stairs, their footsteps echoing like thunder. But the tapping turned into something else now, something heavier, like footsteps. Thud, thud, Thud. It followed them. The boys sprinted to the front door, but it slammed shut on its own. Danny tugged at the handle. "It's locked!" A voice whispered in Mark's ear. "Stay with us." He turned and saw the shadows. Figures moving closer. Their arms stretched toward him, their fingers long and twisted. Each shadow looked human, but their faces were smeared like paint on a canvas. And they were reaching. "Danny, help!" Mark screamed, trying to swat the invisible hands away. Danny pulled harder at the door, and finally it burst open. Cold night air hit their faces. They stumbled outside, tumbling down the steps. The boys ran through the gate, gasping until they couldn't see the house anymore. They didn't stop running until they reached Mark's house. Both boys sat on the floor of his room, shaking. "It touched me," Mark said quietly, looking at his arm. Danny turned pale. "It touched me too." And then Mark noticed it. Bruises. Dark, finger-shaped marks appeared on Danny's wrist. Mark looked at his own arm and saw the same thing. Days passed, but the bruises didn't fade. The boys stopped talking about the house. They stopped going outside. Both of them began to feel it. The touch. Sometimes when they sat still, they felt cold fingers brushing against their necks or shoulders. The bruises grew darker. One night, Mark woke up screaming. He felt hands pulling him out of bed, into the darkness. Danny had the same nightmare. By the end of the week, neither of them came to school. Their parents called the police. When officers searched their rooms, they found smudges on the walls, fingerprints like the ones in the mirror. But the boys were gone. People still talk about that mansion at the edge of town. Sometimes if you walk too close, you'll hear it. Tap, tap, tap. And if you're not careful, you might feel it too. A cold, ghostly hand reaching out to touch you. The days turned darker after Mark and Danny disappeared. The town whispered about what might have happened to the boys, but no one dared to go near the mansion. A few weeks later, the police returned to the house determined to uncover the truth. They walked through the rotting rooms, flashlights sweeping over the peeling walls and broken furniture. The house felt alive. Its silence seemed to breathe. In the upstairs room, they found something. The mirror. It stood there, covered in dust, its surface cracked like spider webs. But when one officer looked closely, his heart froze. On the glass were handprints. Small, childlike handprints. They smeared across the mirror like someone had pressed against it and tried to get out. And then he saw the reflection. Two boys stood behind him in the mirror, Mark and Danny. Their faces were pale, their eyes wide and lifeless. They raised their hands and pressed them against the glass, leaving new marks. The officer turned sharply, but the room was empty. When he looked back at the mirror, the boys were gone. That night, the officer couldn't sleep. He swore he felt something cold brush against his skin. Fingers, invisible hands reaching for him in the dark. The mansion remains abandoned to this day. The windows are sealed and the doors chained shut. But sometimes when the wind is still, you can hear it from the house. Tap, tap, tap. And if you look too long into a mirror, you might see them. Two boys, their faces pale, their hands reaching. No one knows what really happened to Mark and Danny, but one thing is certain. The house took them, and it still wants more. It was a crisp autumn evening when two cars, packed with 8 friends, decided to take a detour on their road trip. They had heard about the infamous Ravenwood jungle, known for its eerie legends. Excitement buzzed in the air as the group debated whether to explore the forest. Their original plan was to reach the next town before nightfall, but curiosity got the better of them. "Come on, it's just a jungle," Mike said, driving the first car. He was the unofficial leader of the group, always pushing for the next thrill. "It's just a bunch of trees," Sarah, sitting beside him, added. "What's the worst that could happen?" In the second car, Liam hesitated. "This doesn't feel right. We should stick to the highway." Emily, sitting in the back seat, rolled her eyes. "Stop being so scared. We'll take a quick look and be back on the road before dark." Against Liam's better judgment, they veered off the highway and onto a narrow dirt road that led into Ravenwood jungle. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over the towering trees. The road grew rough, lined with dense trees that seemed to close in on them. The laughter and chatter in the cars faded as the eerie silence of the jungle enveloped them. "Why is it so quiet?" Mia in the first car whispered. "Relax," Mike said. "It's just nature. Nothing to worry about." A sudden loud crack echoed through the forest, causing everyone to jump. "What was that?" Emily asked nervously from the second car. "Probably just a branch breaking," Liam muttered, gripping the steering wheel tighter. The group decided to stop when they reached a small clearing. They stepped out of the cars, stretching their legs and looking around. The clearing was strange, unnaturally quiet, with no sign of animals or birds. "This place is kind of creepy," Jenna said, rubbing her arms. "Perfect for an adventure," Mike grinned, pulling out his flashlight. "Let's go explore." As they ventured deeper into the jungle, the air grew colder. The group stayed close, their flashlights cutting through the thick darkness. "Do you feel that?" Sarah asked suddenly, stopping in her tracks. "Feel what?" Mike replied. "Like someone brushed past me." "It's just the wind," he said, though his voice lacked confidence. But then Liam felt it too, a cold touch on his shoulder. He spun around, but no one was there. "All right, this isn't funny," he snapped. "No one's messing with you," Mia said, looking around nervously. The whispers began soon after. Faint and distant at first, they sounded like murmurs carried on the wind. But as the group moved, the whispers grew louder, circling them. "Is someone out there?" Jenna called, her voice shaking. There was no answer, only the sound of leaves rustling. When they returned to the clearing, they found the cars scratched and dented, as if something sharp had clawed at them. "What the hell?" Mike said, inspecting the damage. "No way an animal did this," Sarah said, her voice trembling. Emily screamed. Everyone turned to see her pointing at the window of the second car. A single handprint was smeared across the glass. A long, pale handprint, unlike any human hand. "We need to leave, now," Liam said, unlocking the doors. The group piled into the cars, panic rising. The engines roared to life, and they sped back toward the dirt road. But no matter how far they drove, the road seemed endless. The trees grew denser, the darkness thicker. "We've been here before," Jenna whispered, recognizing a fallen tree they had passed earlier. "That's impossible," Mike snapped. "Are we stuck?" Mia asked, her voice barely audible. "Trapped." The cars screeched to a halt when the road abruptly ended. In front of them stood an old wooden sign, half buried in the ground. The words carved into it read, "Turn back before it's too late." "We're lost," Emily whispered, tears streaming down her face. The group decided to stay in the clearing for the night, hoping daylight would guide them out. They locked themselves in the cars, too afraid to step outside. But the night offered no safety. The whispers returned, louder and more persistent. Shadows darted between the trees, circling the cars. Then came the tapping. Light at first, like rain against the windows. But soon it grew heavier, fingernails scratching at the glass. "Don't look outside," Liam warned, his voice shaky. Mike, unable to help himself, peeked out the window. His scream pierced the silence. "What? What did you see?" Sarah demanded. "A face," Mike stammered, his eyes wide. "It was right there. Pale, hollow eyes." The scratching turned to pounding. The cars rocked as if something massive was pushing them. In the chaos, Jenna screamed as the door of the second car flew open. Invisible hands dragged her out, her cries fading into the jungle. "Jenna!" Emily shrieked, but Liam held her back. "We can't help her," he yelled. "We have to get out of here." One by one, the group was picked off. Mia vanished when she stepped out of the car to check the engine. Mike disappeared into the darkness, chasing what he thought was Jenna's voice. By dawn, only Sarah and Liam remained. Exhausted and terrified, they stumbled through the jungle, desperate to find the road. "I think I see something," Liam said, pointing to a faint light in the distance. They ran toward it, only to find themselves back at the same clearing. The cars were gone, replaced by a massive tree. Its bark was covered in handprints, dozens of them, pale and ghostly. "This isn't real," Sarah whispered, backing away. The whispers returned, louder than ever, and the cold touch brushed against their skin. "Run!" Liam shouted, grabbing Sarah's hand. They ran until they collapsed on a narrow dirt road. The sun had risen, casting golden light over the jungle. "We made it," Sarah gasped, tears streaming down her face. But when Liam looked back, he froze. The tree line seemed closer, as if the jungle was reaching for them. And then he saw them, the pale figures standing in the shadows, watching, waiting. "We have to go," Liam said, pulling Sarah to her feet. They flagged down a passing truck and escaped, leaving Ravenwood jungle behind. But the nightmare didn't end. Weeks later, Sarah began waking up to the feeling of cold hands on her skin. Liam started hearing whispers in his home. One night, Sarah disappeared without a trace, her bedroom window open and handprints smeared across the walls. Liam, now alone, refuses to sleep near mirrors or in the dark. He knows they're still watching, waiting to pull him back into the jungle. And the road to Ravenwood remains, luring in anyone foolish enough to take the detour. If you ever feel a cold touch in the middle of the night, don't turn around. Don't listen to the whispers. Just run. Jess, Mia, Liam, and their friend Sam had been inseparable since high school. They loved exploring abandoned places and telling ghost stories by the campfire. One evening, as the four of them sat around a fire near Jess's backyard, Sam brought up Blackwood Forest, a sprawling, uncharted area on the edge of their town. "They say it's haunted," Sam said, his voice low. "People who go in never come out the same. They feel things, cold touches, whispers." Jess rolled her eyes. "Come on, Sam, every place is haunted to you." "I'm serious," Sam replied. "They say there's a clearing deep inside where people hear footsteps but see no one, and some never come back." Mia, the most adventurous of the group, grinned. "Let's go. We've explored worse." Liam hesitated. "Guys, maybe this isn't the best idea." Jess smirked. "Don't tell me you're scared, Liam." After some teasing, they decided to visit the forest the next evening. They packed flashlights, snacks, and sleeping bags, ready for a night of adventure. The entrance to Blackwood Forest was marked by tall, twisted trees that blocked out most of the sunlight. As the group stepped inside, the air grew colder. The dense canopy above made it feel like nighttime, even though it was only early evening. "This place is creepy," Jess admitted, looking around. Sam smirked. "Told you." Mia led the way, pushing aside branches and leaves. "Let's find this haunted clearing. We'll camp there and prove there's nothing to be scared of." As they walked deeper into the forest, the atmosphere grew heavier. The usual sounds of the woods, chirping birds, rustling leaves, were absent. The silence pressed against them. "I don't like this," Liam muttered, glancing over his shoulder. "Relax," Jess said. "It's just a forest." After an hour of walking, they reached the clearing Sam had mentioned. The ground was covered in dead leaves, and a large flat rock sat in the center. The trees around the clearing were blackened, as if burned, and their twisted branches looked like arms reaching toward the sky. "This is it," Sam said, setting his bag down. They set up their camp and lit a fire. The warmth was comforting, but the coldness of the forest seemed to creep closer, as if the shadows were alive. "Tell us a story, Sam," Mia said, breaking the silence. Sam grinned. "How about the one about this forest? They say a group of travelers camped here years ago. They woke up to cold hands grabbing them. They screamed, but no one heard. By morning they were gone, and all that was left were handprints in the dirt." Jess laughed nervously. "Great bedtime story, Sam." Liam shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe we should head back." "Come on, Liam. Don't be a buzzkill," Mia said. As the night deepened, the fire began to die down. They huddled closer together, trying to ignore the growing chill. "Did you hear that?" Jess whispered. Everyone froze. A faint rustling sound came from the trees. "It's probably just an animal," Mia said, though her voice wavered. Then they heard it. A faint whisper, too soft to make out the words. Liam's flashlight flicked on, sweeping the edge of the clearing. "Who's there?" he shouted. The whispering stopped. "It's the wind," Jess said, though she didn't sound convinced. The group decided to sleep in shifts, with Sam and Mia staying awake first. The others crawled into their sleeping bags, trying to ignore the eerie feeling pressing down on them. "Hey," Sam nudged Mia. "Did you feel that?" She frowned. "Feel what?" "Something touched me." Before Mia could respond, the whispering returned, louder this time. It came from every direction. Mia grabbed her flashlight and pointed it at the trees. The beam revealed nothing but shadows. Then Sam screamed, "Something's touching me!" Mia jumped to her feet. "Wake up! Something's here!" Jess and Liam scrambled out of their sleeping bags, their flashlights bouncing wildly. The whispering grew louder, overlapping, like a chorus of voices. Cold air wrapped around them, and they all felt it, fingers brushing against their arms, their necks, their faces. "Run!" Jess shouted. They grabbed their backpacks and bolted into the forest, the whispers following them. Shadows moved in the corners of their vision, darting between the trees. The cold touches didn't stop, as if invisible hands were reaching out to grab them. "This way!" Sam yelled, leading the group deeper into the woods. "That's not the way out!" Liam shouted back. But Sam didn't listen. He was running blindly, panic taking over. The others followed, too scared to stop. Suddenly, Sam tripped over a root and fell. The others stopped to help him up, but when they turned to look, he was gone. "Sam!" Mia screamed, shining her flashlight into the darkness. There was no sign of him. The whispering grew deafening. "Keep moving!" Jess cried, grabbing Mia's arm. They ran until they stumbled into another clearing. This one was different. The trees were closer together, their branches forming a canopy so thick not even moonlight could break through. In the center stood a single, massive tree with a hollow trunk. "Where are we?" Liam asked, panting. Mia pointed at the tree. "Is that blood?" Red stains dripped down the bark, and faint handprints covered the base of the tree. "We need to leave," Jess whispered. But before they could move, the whispers stopped. The silence was suffocating. Then one by one, cold hands emerged from the shadows, pale and skeletal. They reached for the group, moving closer. Jess screamed as a hand grabbed her ankle, pulling her to the ground. Mia and Liam tried to pull her free, but the hands multiplied, dragging her toward the tree. "Don't let go!" Jess cried, tears streaming down her face. But the hands were too strong. She was pulled into the hollow tree, her screams echoing until they were swallowed by silence. Mia and Liam ran, not looking back. The forest seemed endless, the trees twisting and shifting as if alive. Cold fingers brushed against their necks, their arms, their faces, but they didn't stop. Finally, they broke through the tree line and collapsed into the dirt road. The forest was silent again, the whispers gone. "Jess and Sam," Mia sobbed. "They're gone," Liam said, his voice hollow. The two of them made it back to town, but they were never the same. Both bore bruises on their arms, dark marks in the shape of fingers. They couldn't sleep without feeling cold hands brushing against them. A week later, Mia vanished from her home. Her mirror was shattered, and handprints covered the walls. Liam tried to warn others about the forest, but no one believed him. He avoided mirrors and reflective surfaces, knowing the hands were always watching. One night he heard the whispers again. He knew it was his turn. The next morning, Liam was gone. Only a single handprint remained on his bedroom wall. Blackwood Forest still stands, its shadows waiting. If you ever feel a cold touch in the woods, don't turn around. Don't listen to the whispers. And whatever you do, don't stop running. Tom and Lily were cousins and close friends. They spent every summer together, finding adventures where no one else dared to go. This summer was different. Lily had heard about a mansion deep in the woods on the outskirts of town. It was old, abandoned, and surrounded by stories no one wanted to believe. They say no one comes back the same, Lily whispered, grinning mischievously. Tom frowned. That's just a story. You don't really believe that, do you? Lily shrugged. Let's find out. Tom didn't like the idea, but Lily was stubborn. She always had to see things for herself. So on a gloomy afternoon, the two of them packed a flashlight, a bottle of water, and headed toward the mansion. The house appeared suddenly through the trees, like it had been waiting for them. Its roof sagged and its walls were covered in moss. The windows were dark, like hollow eyes staring back at them. The front door was slightly open, as if it were inviting them in. This feels wrong, Tom said quietly. Don't be a baby, Lily teased, stepping onto the broken porch. The wood creaked under her weight, but she didn't hesitate. Tom followed, his heart thudding in his chest. The air grew colder as they stepped inside. It was as if the house was swallowing them whole. Dust hung in the air, and the smell of mildew burned their noses. The floor beneath their feet groaned, and the walls seemed to whisper. Let's look around, Lily said, shining her flashlight through the shadows. The house was larger than it seemed. There were rooms upon rooms, each one filled with broken furniture, shattered mirrors, and torn curtains. In one room, they found an old rocking chair swaying slowly on its own. Tom stepped back. Lily, we shouldn't be here. But Lily ignored him. It's just the wind. Let's go upstairs. The staircase moaned as they climbed. The banister felt damp and every step made Tom more uneasy. When they reached the top, Lily's flashlight flickered. Don't do that, Tom said, his voice sharp. I didn't do anything, Lily replied. A door at the end of the hallway was open. Cold air flowed out of it like a breath. Lily aimed her flashlight inside and the beam landed on a large, dusty mirror. It was cracked down the middle, like a scar. Look at that, Lily whispered. Tom hesitated. Why is it just sitting there? Lily stepped into the room, her flashlight shaking slightly. Tom followed, though every instinct told him to turn and run. The mirror reflected their figures, but something was off. The room behind them in the reflection looked darker, like shadows had gathered there. And then they saw it. Hands. Faint, pale hands pressed against the inside of the mirror, sliding downward, leaving streaks on the glass. The hands didn't belong to anyone they could see. Tom grabbed Lily's arm. We need to go. Now! Before they could move, the door slammed shut. The flashlight went out. The room fell into complete darkness. Tom? Lily's voice trembled. I'm here, Tom whispered, his hand gripping her sleeve. He could barely see her outline. Then he felt it. A touch. Soft, cold fingers brushed against the back of his neck. He flinched, spinning around. Who's there? Lily screamed. Something touched me. The room erupted in noise. Footsteps echoed all around them. Hands brushed their arms, their shoulders, their faces. Hands that weren't there. The air grew thick, and the whispers started. Stay with us. Tom pounded on the door. Let us out, please. Lily sobbed beside him. It's touching me, Tom. Suddenly the mirror began to glow faintly, its cracked surface pulsing like a heartbeat. Shadows moved within it, dark figures with stretched out hands, their faces smeared and hollow. The hands inside the mirror pressed harder against the glass, as if trying to break through. Tom grabbed Lily's hand and pulled her toward the door. Help me push it open. Together they shoved the heavy wooden door with all their strength. The whispers grew louder. The cold hands grabbed at their clothes, their arms, pulling them backward. Finally, the door gave way, and they stumbled into the hallway. Tom didn't look back. Run, Lily! They flew down the stairs, their footsteps thundering. The cold followed them. The whispers chased them. The front door stood open, and without hesitation, they ran through it and didn't stop until they reached the edge of the woods. Tom collapsed onto the ground, gasping for breath. Lily sat beside him, tears streaming down her face. "It touched me," she said quietly, staring at her arms. Tom looked too. Dark, finger-shaped bruises appeared on her wrists and shoulders, marks where something had grabbed her. He looked down at his own hands and saw the same bruises forming. "What was that?" Tom whispered. Lily shook her head. "I don't know, but we can't go back." They never spoke of the house again, but the bruises didn't fade. Weeks passed and both of them felt it, cold fingers brushing against their skin, even when they were alone. Tom would wake up at night, paralyzed, feeling hands pressing down on his chest. Lily said she saw figures in her mirrors, always watching. Then one day, Lily disappeared. Tom tried to tell people what had happened, but no one believed him. His family said he was imagining things, but at night, alone in his room, he still felt the touch. 1 week after Lily vanished, Tom woke up to a sound. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from the mirror across his room. He stared, frozen. Slowly, faint hands pressed against the inside of the glass, and Lily's face appeared, pale, her eyes empty, her mouth moving silently. Then, hands reached out of the mirror. Tom didn't scream. He didn't run. He couldn't. The hands grabbed him, pulling him forward into the glass. The next morning, Tom's family found his room empty. On the surface of the mirror, there were smudges, handprints, and 2 faint shapes standing together on the other side. No one knows what happened to Tom and Lily, but the house remains. People who go near it say they hear whispers and feel something cold brush against them. And if you ever see a mirror with cracks, don't look too closely, because the hands might be waiting for you too.